You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. In this show, we go beyond the campfire stories to bring you firsthand encounters from people who say they've seen something impossible, from backwoods trails and remote mountain haulers to quiet farms and crowded highways. The stories come from everywhere, and each one leaves us with more questions than answers. These are the voices of the people who've lived it, so settle in, because today you'll hear another account that just might change the way you see the woods forever. So stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Dr. Simeon Hein today. Simeon is an individual that I was able to meet at the 2025 Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, Oregon, which is awesome to meet him in person. A little bit about Simeon before we get started. He's an author, researcher, musician, and lecturer who focuses on the physics and sociology of Bigfoot, UFOs, remote viewing, and other non-ordinary electromagnetic phenomena. And his books and more can be found on his website, which is simeonhein.com. And I'll have that linked down in the show notes. But welcome to the show, Simeon. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, Jeremiah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here today.
It's just so cool to be able to talk to you about your work. Your interview, to also plug Flash of Beauty, guys, your 2-part interview was very instrumental in helping me work through a lot of things that I've experienced over the years and realizing that, hey, it's really not a lot of people are experiencing things. Here's probably the reason why. And it's very cool. It's such an interesting book. It delves into the phenomena of Bigfoot, UFO, other things, and puts the lens of fringe science onto it and maybe explaining why we are where we are. Let's say if a person was to pick up your book, Dark Matter Monsters, and there's a Bigfoot right on the cover.
Yeah.
Which is, oh man, we're talking about cryptids, we're talking about ball lightning and the science of secret life forms, which is fantastic. But if you're just to meet someone in the street and you're talking, as you mentioned in the book, I'm talking to people that are around Colorado, how do you present what a dark matter monster is?
That's a good question. And I like to listen to people's stories the way they tell them, just like you do on this podcast. And I just will tell people what I do. And if people have had experiences that seem unexplainable, out of the ordinary, on the edge, I like to listen to hear what they have to say. So I'm not trying to convert people that are not inherently interested in the topic. I'm attempting to talk to people that have had an experience sometime in their life, or had a relative who had an experience, or a close friend, or someone they really trust and they know is telling the truth. Something that's stuck at the back of their mind their whole lives that just doesn't fit the version of reality that we grew up in from our school system and Western culture. And I like to ask them about it and hear what they have to say. And that's how I can introduce my ideas about what may explain some of that going on. Now, if going back to your question, if I'm talking to someone and they just don't have any interest in anything related to what we call the paranormal, it's going to be a very short conversation. But surprisingly, Jeremiah, a lot of people have had some sort of experience with what we call the paranormal somewhere. And when I'm getting my hair cut or something like this, and the hairdresser asks me what I do, most of the time people say, I'm fascinated by this subject. I love Bigfoot. I love UFO shows. What do you think's really going on? Then we're going to have a conversation.
Are there things that you listen for in conversations like that really set off the, let's say, I know I do this when I'm talking to people, they set off the bells in my head and I'm like, okay, here we go. Are there certain, let's say, phrases that you're listening for when you're talking to these individuals?
Yeah, I'm listening and I'm looking at body language, because having been involved with remote viewing, what I call resonant viewing, resonance, sensing, it's something that as the monitor, watching the viewer do their session, certain types of body language that repeats over and over again. Micro movements, we call them. It's subconscious body language. There are people that probably specialize this, that work for the FBI and law enforcement, attempting to tell if people are giving them a true story or not. And it's that type of body language that I can see where the person seems to be reliving their experience to some degree as they tell it to you again. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
You're going to hear it in the types of witnesses that you talk to. And it spans the range of paranormal phenomena. I'm including Bigfoot and cryptids in that category. Just whether you believe it's just a pure flesh and blood Gigantopithecus blackie or something that has other dimensional aspects to it, it still within our culture fits in with that range of phenomena that is outside the ordinary set of belief systems that we're taught about. And so when people talk about these experiences, there is a degree of trauma and a degree of feeling insecure or unsafe telling the story to other people. And so that's what I can see, and that's what gets my interest going, is that to me is an indicator of validity, of veridical, we call it a veridical type of evidence. There's some verifiable aspect to it. If we, hypothetically, we could verify this if we had been there or had other means we could have seen and observed using the types of observation that we accept in science and law, that this something really happened to this person. They are not just making this up, fantasizing, imagining, which I'm not saying that those types of experiences aren't real in their own way. But what we want is experiences that we can agree upon what happened. And we've got that with this type of topic in spades. In fact, I'm really surprised by how similar people's experiences are with a lot of these phenomena. And that's what motivated me to write Dark Matter Monsters, is I kept hearing the same sorts of features and characteristics of the environment of these encounters with Bigfoot, with orbs and related phenomena. And I could see these patterns, and it led me to believe that the similarities of these experiences, and Jeremiah, even debunkers pick up on this consistency of experience, but they use it to say humans all have the same type of brain, so the brain's creating the same sort of illusion. That's really, I think it's a cop-out explanation, actually, because you could say that about anything. To me, it indicates they are dealing with a similar type of phenomena wherever they are on the globe. And that's the sort of thing that I look for.
That makes perfect sense. I did experience that for the first time out in Oak Ridge in 2024, because that's when I was really, for the first time, talking to people face to face. And you notice things like the person really doesn't want to be there anymore. They get very uncomfortable. It's like they're reliving it. You've got goosebumps on their skin of their arms, maybe. Their eyes are kind of changing, like maybe dilating a little bit. Very, very interesting. But you mentioned that you started to notice patterns that would come up, and maybe they would be referred to as maybe paranormal related. But would you be able to go through a few of these patterns that you started to notice that perhaps could be explained by science?
Yes. One of them, I think one of the major characteristics here is this sudden feeling of the environment changing from something that doesn't feel hospitable or friendly or conducive. It's a feeling that something's not right. It verges on being a premonition. Just a feeling, it could be in the forest or even in a non-forested area, of a change where It seems like sound doesn't propagate the same way. Colors start to look a little darker. They lose the kind of variety of hues that we're used to when we see color. Things shift towards the darker end of the visual spectrum. And there are these temperature changes. People describe it like a sudden stillness that seems to come over the area that even affects insects. And so you begin to wonder whether there is some sort of change to the structure of the environment that is affecting how electromagnetic waves and sound propagate through ordinary mediums we're used to, mainly air, right? How what is going on that the entire range of our senses is shifted by the presence of these creatures, or even in other types of situations with other types of phenomena. But you get the same sort of effect, is that sounds seem different, the colors seem different, the temperature changes. Usually it gets colder. And so it just goes, even on a sunny day, you get this gut feeling like you should turn around and leave. And I've heard this from people that never even saw anything, but they said it affected their pets too. The pets, which were normally fearless dogs. I have one of these myself. These types of dogs that don't seem afraid of anything, all of a sudden are coming back to you, hiding behind you, or running under the car, something that's really unusual for them. Now, you could make the argument, Jeremiah, if you're just like a cut and dry biologist, that this is just an ordinary response to a predator being in the area. But the reason I don't think that explanation completely explains it is because of these other physical characteristics that change in the environment that you normally don't see around ordinary mammals. Everyone probably listening has been to the zoo at some point. You don't see these things happening at the zoo. You don't see your camera start to fail, batteries draining, stuff like this, the electromagnetic effects. You don't see that around ordinary mammals. Just using a zoo is a good kind of control environment here. But you do get it around Bigfoot encounters and related phenomena. So that's what you're looking for. And in science, that's the gold standard here, is replicability. Isn't that what we're told? Is that repeatability, replicability is one of the key features of what we consider to be modern science, is that different people could reproduce the same effect in a different setting. And that consistency is so strong around Bigfoot and cryptids. It led me in the direction of saying, it's not just fringe science we're talking about. We're talking about an entirely different type of electromagnetism than we're used to being around. Because it affects devices too. You can talk to researchers who say their car batteries were affected, multiple batteries were affected at the same time in the same parking lot when they got back to their cars, devices, and so forth. So the fact that it can affect, for the most skeptical people, you could say the fact that it affects electronic devices, which are usually so reliable, work in so many different circumstances and ranges of temperatures, integrated circuits, and semiconductors. The fact that those are affected by what we're told is, even if you accept just the idea, okay, Bigfoot does exist, but it's just a rare North American wood ape. How would you explain how just a rare mammal, if that's all Bigfoot is, would affect electronics? That just simply doesn't make sense from any sort of conventional explanation. And that's how you end up in the direction that I did with my writings and my research and so forth.
Absolutely. And I think something I took away from the book that was just fascinating, because I'm not super versed in the UFO side as well, or UAP side, and how there are similarities between witnesses and experiencers on that side and on the Bigfoot side as well. But I wasn't aware of all the experiences where witnesses on that side or who get in close proximity will have really powerful physical ailments happen, or maybe things that could be like directed radiation or things like that.
No, that's fascinating aspect of it, isn't it? You would not think there would be this parallel between UFOs, what we now call UAP, and Bigfoot. I remember going to Bigfoot UFO conferences before I was interested in Bigfoot. And you would have like one Bigfoot presenter per conference. So I got exposed to it that way. And it was so fascinating that there was even some overlap between what would seem to be completely unrelated subjects. But if you go back to what the witnesses say, and this goes back to the research of Stan Gordon from Pennsylvania, going back when he started as a phone answering kid for a UFO group in Pittsburgh, after school UFO group, back to 1959. He said, when I asked him about it, he said he started just fielding calls about UFOs, but the Bigfoot encounters were there just 5 or 6 years later, starting in the 60s, before the Patterson-Gimlin film. People were reporting Bigfoot around UFOs. And I don't blame people for thinking, how are these possibly related? It seems like a real stretch going from space aliens to wood apes. But what it's telling you, the data are telling you, is that your preconceptions about it are way too limited, that there's something bigger going on that may not easily fit in any of your mental categories. But that's what the witnesses, some of them, say they experience. You only have to read Stan Gordon's books, Silent Invasion, Creepy Cryptids, and watch some of his presentations, and you'll see that this sometimes happens where people see Bigfoot, experience them in and around their homes or wherever they are, and also see orbs or just full-fledged UFOs in the same area, either at the exact same time or around the same time period. Again, suggesting that both Bigfoot and UFOs have something to do with another type of reality, another version of our own reality, a pocket, that's the way I think of it, within our reality. Or maybe we're in the pocket, but it's something to do with our reality that we haven't really looked at very much, but again, has that repeatability and those same sorts of characteristics that you just mentioned. Now, this sudden sort of fear that people experience is in and of itself really fascinating, because the witnesses I've talked to have described it in terms that you just used a few minutes ago when you asked me the question, which is, it seems like a projected fear. It's a little different than that foreboding sense that people have before an encounter. This is a very strong feeling of dread and terror that people have told me they knew was not coming from within inside them. It felt like it was being projected by the creature from the outside, because it turned off again like a light switch when the creature left. So they had these extreme levels of terror, panic, and fear. Some people describe it as the most terrifying feeling they've ever felt in their lives, that feeling of real dread, like you're about to be dinner feeling. And then it just vanishes really quickly. And so I'm not saying that this is all it is, but people have described it to me as something that's being projected onto them, almost like a type of electromagnetic or sonic weaponry from the creatures. And then people also sometimes get this, and not always, around UFOs and so forth, or alleged extraterrestrials and life forms like that. So the question, is it something that's deliberate on the part of the Bigfoot, or is it a byproduct of their particular sort of, in the loosest sense of the word, frequency? It could be either or both.
Listeners, this conversation is just going to be the surface of it. You will really have to dig into the book to get the whole story, but this is just going to be a really fun conversation. Do you think that, you mentioned or maybe alluded to it, that there's something else going on, maybe some kind of multiverse, or do you think there could be different parts of the U.S. that, or maybe window areas or areas of high strangeness that's concentrated?
Yes, I do think it's concentrated in certain areas, but having said that, it does seem to spread out over the whole U.S. because there are no states without Bigfoot sightings. I was surprised even to find, spending some time recently back in New York, where I grew up, looking on the BFRO database, sightings in Westchester County, where I grew up as a kid, which is just north of New York City. And then talking to people just a few weeks ago there and getting information about witnesses who saw tree structures and creatures standing at the edge of forest lines in just outside of suburbia, a major metropolitan area. And even some reports right there, just 20 miles north of New York City. It seems to be, and that's just my personal case, you hear about cases on Cape Cod, the little peninsula coming off from Massachusetts, where I used to spend time when I was a kid with my family, having grown up on the East Coast. Places you wouldn't expect Bigfoot, just because you don't have a lot of forest cover there. The things that we expect to be essential to Bigfoot habitat, maybe that's mythology. Maybe they don't need those forests, and it's something that we're creating because of our association of it being like an ape or something like this. But there do seem to be pocket areas. I gave us talk about this to the Snippy 25 conference near Alamosa in Colorado. If people want to come to that next year, I am told it will be open to the public. It's been a private conference for the ranch family for a few years, but that will be open next year, Snippy 25. And the more research I did into these phenomena, the more it seemed, and this is something we can go into at another time, Jeremiah. I'm going to put up a video or some videos about it on my YouTube channel shortly, about the geology of the planet creating electromagnetic anomaly areas from charge clusters, electrically active materials like gilsonite that's beneath the Uinta Basin in Utah, home of the Skinwalker Ranch, and Alamosa, San Luis Valley, the silica, materials that naturally gather static charges, which from my perspective, coming from this perspective that I talk about in Dark Matter Monsters, and I talked about in A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, the second Flash of Beauty movie that's available online for people to watch, that there is this component to these phenomena that have to do with what we call coherent matter, a type of matter past plasmas. And this sort of gets to why we see these orbs and ball lightning and what we call mobile luminous objects, anomalous light phenomena around all these different types of paranormal experiences, including people say they experience it around Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Native Americans talked about this. So it does seem to be related to charge clusters, condensed static, electricity, something that science doesn't understand very well. And it seems to be related to certain areas So there is an overlap there, and it would suggest that, going back to your question, is it a parallel reality or is it like multiverse? Or, and this is where I'm going with my next YouTube video about the work of Ken Shoulders, who studied exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters, what he at one time called electromagnetic vortices, vortex energy, EVs, electron vortex structures, later called them EVOs, that this creates certain changes in the sort of electromagnetic structure of the area, which is conducive to other types of phenomena, electronic phenomena, and Shoulders says life forms, electronic life forms that operate at different types of physics constants that we're not normally used to. So, Jeremiah, just to answer your question, he suggests that it's within our reality. It's not, again, it's something I've studied extensively, parallel realities. Hugh Everett III in the 50s creating this many worlds interpretation of MWI, many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And there are other versions of that talk about parallel realities. And I think those exist, but because they're parallel, they don't often have much of an influence on our reality. What Shoulders is talking about is within our visual world, there's a dark world. He calls it a world of black organizations with ghostly properties. And he's not trying to be spooky there. He's actually talking from experimental research into charge clusters, which he could see had a dark state and even had different speeds of light compared to what we're used to. Which gets back to what we see around UFOs, UAP, why they seem shifted into the blue spectrum and so forth. And this has been seen around Bigfoot. If you read the witness accounts, you'll see that people experience them sometimes with a blue glow around their bodies, which suggests to me that they are shifting into the blue spectrum of visual light from changes to what we call permittivity, permeability, the dielectric constant and magnetic constants that usually are fixed. They certainly don't oscillate very much. Each substance has a slightly different permeability and permittivity, but if they're oscillating and they're active, they would make things seem blurry to our eyes. And that checks a big box right there, doesn't it, Jeremiah?
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
how many times have we heard the photos turned out blurry, right? How come the photos of UFOs are all blurry? And now that we have AI and advanced video, photographic editing, and all this, how come it's so sharp? But it used to be, why is it so blurry? And why are all the photos of Bigfoot blurry, right? And all these cryptids, they don't look quite right. And if you've looked at a lot of ghost photographs that people have taken, there's this blurriness to it, right? Which leads the skeptics to say it's an artifact of the camera lens and so forth. But the explanation from condensed matter physics is that blurriness is caused by what's called oscillating permittivity, the dielectric constant. In other words, instead of being fixed like we're used to in the devices we're using right now to communicate, and the materials around us, it could be fluctuating, which would mean to cameras and our eyes too, it isn't going to look like it's in focus. And that's a really big one right there, because if you can explain the blurriness with this type of discussion we're having here based on readily accepted physics, just the physics that people haven't looked at very much because it's outside the norm, then you really explained a lot, because so much of what we call paranormal seems to be blurry and have this often a blue tinge to it. And yet there are good, I'm not saying this is necessarily correct, but there are good reasons why you see that. And people have seen it in the lab around low energy nuclear reaction, coherent energy transformations, and so forth. And I suspect, Jeremiah, that this is the stuff of classified government research too, because Dr. Hal Puthoff, who we knew from the remote viewing program at Stanford, but also has admitted to being the lead scientist on OSAP program, later known as ATIP, from the Department of Defense, the Department of Defense UFO research program, according to James Lukatsky in his book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Hal Puthoff has said publicly a couple of times, I've been there at one of these lectures. One of them was in Las Vegas in 2018 at a joint meeting of the Society for Scientific Exploration and International Remote Viewing Association, both of whom I've been a member of these organizations a long time, been to a lot of meetings. So Hal gets up there and tells us that what they suspect is going on is that these craft can manipulate permittivity with metamaterials that act like waveguides and effectively change their speed of light relative to us, which would cause each of them and us to be in different frames of reference, in a sense, but yet together at the same time. Now, Shoulders calls that, he says these are objects that don't completely couple into our ordinary description of reality because their permittivity is different, their speed of light is increased. By the way, for those people who are thinking, wait a minute, speed of light's fixed, right? This is what we were taught. Einstein himself wrote 2 papers about variable speed of light in I believe it was 1907 and 1911, around that time, or 1909. He argued there could be a variable speed of light based on mass affecting the speed of light as it moves through the universe and stars and so forth. So he even made an argument for it, though he didn't really push that because it was enough just to go with his theories of relativity, was enough for him just to publicize and write about it at the time. But he said it could be variable, and that's what Hal told us they think is going on. I'm saying the OSAP ATIP programs and whatever it's called now. And this is formally classified research. So if this doesn't sound totally familiar to people, it's not your fault. This has been hidden from us because the government felt that it could reveal too many national security secrets to talk about it publicly. So that's as far as we got when Hal told us that. And he talked about one type of material, bismuth, magnesium, and so forth. Layered waveguide materials that they didn't think was manufactured here on Earth. That's just another subject. But it does relate back to Bigfoot because you get some of these same anomalous, blurry effects around Bigfoot. And one more thing, Jeremiah, is that even Stan Gordon wrote about his witnesses, mostly in western Pennsylvania, all those townships in southwestern Pennsylvania, southeast of the Pittsburgh area, east of Pittsburgh. People describe the creatures looking blurry to their eyes, not even with the camera. They just said it looked blurry. And this isn't just Dan. It's these different accounts you read about and hear people talk about. They said the creatures looked blurry. And then there are other cases where the creatures looked partly invisible, right? Like you could only see them from the waist up. And there are other cases where people only saw huge legs and nothing above the waist. You've heard these encounters if you've listened to different podcasts. Huge legs out there with no body. And then Stan Gordon takes the cake here with some creatures. I'm not even sure what type of creatures we're talking about here, if it's a Bigfoot or not, where they were like striped invisibility, like parts were visible and parts were transparent. And that's okay. So that checks so many boxes right there. Using this sort of idea that I'm talking to you about, permittivity, permeability, basic magnetic and electric constants, that's what again, led me in the direction of thinking that there's an electromagnetic aspect to all of this that's pretty important that hasn't been studied. It hasn't been studied a lot because even Bigfoot researchers, whatever that means, mainstream Bigfoot researchers, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you often hear people say, we want science to accept us. So we don't want UFOs in our database. We don't want anything weird. We just want just the facts, man. But that's what the facts are, is that it looks blurry some of the time. And other things like that. There's this tendency to want to normalize the subject. And I kind of laugh when I hear this from researchers who believe that if they sanitize Bigfoot, it'll be more acceptable to the mainstream. And then maybe they'll get funding. I understand the logic. I even heard Jeff Meldrum say this in the interview. Jeff, who we all miss and who's a big researcher and very important in getting Bigfoot on the map. But even in one of these interviews, I heard him is part of one these sort of podcast memorials to him. And I never met him, but I heard a lot about him and so forth. I watched his presentations and so forth. But he even said, oh, just stick to, and I'm not trying to criticize him, but he said to new researchers, oh, just stick to mainstream stuff until you get tenure, until you're full professor, all that stuff. And this is not right. You're creating scientific falsehoods for funding, for acceptability, for career stability. And I am sorry, but when you do that, you're selling out. That's just how Simeon looks at it. And I'm not trying to criticize other academics. I've been there. I come from a family of academics. I know that you have to play the game like in any other job. But if you do it too much, you're not telling the truth anymore. And that's what happened with the Bigfoot subject matter, is you had these academics who were just saying, look, it's real. And I was right downstairs from Grover Krantz at WSU. He was one floor up from me in the 80s. I never met him, but I had a friend who hung out with him a lot, who was older than me, who could afford to do that. And so it wasn't a subject matter that was on my radar, even though the first ever Bigfoot conference, I'm told, in the U.S., one of the first, was at WSU in 1989. And I didn't even know about it. It wasn't on my radar back then. But Grover Krantz was really close by. People like Grover and Jeff and others paid a big price for arguing that Bigfoot was real, just on and John Bindernagel, too, from Canada, right? These people really put their effort into, they've all three passed on now. They put so much of their career on the line just to say that Bigfoot was real. From evidence, footprints, hair samples, vocalization. And they had that evidence in spades, and they couldn't get anyone to pay attention to them for the most part, right? They got ignored, hostility, and so forth. All three of them talked about this. And so I get that just to argue that Bigfoot was real might lead you in the direction of saying, look, we don't want to talk about the weird, spooky, wooky stuff, right? What people call the woo, because we want science to accept it. I say to heck with that. Let's just go with the evidence. Let the chips fall where they will.
Absolutely.
And let's honor the witnesses who've had the courage to come forward and tell us their story, which is not always easy because they have to relive the experience.
Oh, yeah.
They relive the trauma. Yeah. So I say to heck with science accepting it. Science didn't accept electromagnetism. They didn't accept Maxwell or James Faraday in the day. Those guys were miserable if you read their writings. They were considered to be weirdos in believing in things that were not visible. Electromagnetism, temperature, imponderables, they were called. They were not considered real. Anyone who's ever gone off in a new direction gets a lot of hostility from those who just want to count how many angels are on the head of a pin. Okay? Because they want to stick with just sophistry and metaphysical arguments, while data-driven people who are dealing with experiments like Faraday and Maxwell want to explain reality, and they're not popular with the older guard who want to stick with things that can't be disproved. So this is what Bigfoot researchers have encountered. But look, this is what the witnesses tell us they're saying. And in my field, Jeremiah, in sociology, it's a cardinal sin to omit data. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
That's this. Yes. You know what I'm talking about. That is the strength of sociology. People make fun of sociology because it's not one of the hard sciences, but it's a softer science, but there's benefits to that, which is you're told from day one, you are not here to edit what the witnesses tell you. It's true in anthropology too, with participant observation. You're not there to decide what's real and what's not. You're there to listen to what people are telling you and to make sense of it over a period of time without you judging what they're saying. Otherwise, you're introducing bias into the scientific process, and that's what we had happen with Bigfoot. You're introducing
it's
your
one of
own
the saddest
preconceptions.
things. It's just a sad commentary, but you hear it and you see it a lot, and that's something I had to make a decision on a few years ago is, okay, I'm starting to get these weird accounts. What am I going to do? Am I going to bury it or am I going to let it out there? And I was like, you know what? They are experiencing something. It needs to get out there. So that's what I decided, and I've gone with it.
Oh, good for you.
I think it's a huge decision that everyone needs to make on their own. But really, if one of the things I took away from your book is it almost seems like, let's say we're focusing on Bigfoot, is that they have maybe access to things that we don't have in our understanding of science. They have access to maybe, or I guess, dark matter, to put it a certain way. And that's I think it's, for me, it's a hard thing to put across, but is there any way that it's able to be boiled down into a conversation that takes place on a podcast, which it's just, you're skimming the surface?
Yes, I think there is, Jeremiah. Everyone is familiar with these little ultrasonic cleaning devices that clean jewelry that you can get on Amazon for like $30. Ultrasonic. Has anyone ever used like an ultrasonic toothbrush or had a cleaning at the dentist where they used one of those little tools that creates a little it doesn't hurt, it's just a very fast vibration that goes between your teeth, using sound to clean something? That is, when you put it into liquids, it creates something called cavitation. This is a really interesting subject. It's using ultrasonic frequencies to create little bubbles in liquids. And when those bubbles collapse, they produce a tremendous amount of energy. That's called cavitation. And they seem to produce excess heat. And it's another way to generate what's called LENR, low energy nuclear reactions, charge clusters. The way I mentioned Ken Shoulders before, he created charge clusters on metals and so forth with solid state electronics, little micro ball lightnings, as he called them. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, but other researchers have used water and used sound, ultrasonic energy to generate cavitation, which is, if you increase it enough, seems to tap in to some sort of quantum level bonding of molecules. And when they disassociate and come apart and they come back together again, the little bubbles collapse. They seem to create more heat than it uses initially to create the bubble in the first place, which is called excess heat. And when you start doing that, you get all sorts of interesting transmutation going on that changes elements from one type of element on the periodic chart into another element, what's called alchemy or nucleonic transmutation. And one way to do it is through high frequency sound. And there is evidence that once you've started to generate this process, it can create a number of exotic nucleonic quantum interactions involving neutrinos, antineutrinos, and so forth. And people that are interested in this topic, what used to be called cold fusion, are interested in creating a chain reaction whereby you take that excess heat and you put it back into the reactor, into the experiment, to create an infinite loop of energy. And that is where the belief and the evidence goes in the direction, the debate about whether cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, coherent energy transformations, as it's now called, is that real or not? Can you create excess heat? And once you have that excess heat, could you feed that back in to a device or something to keep it sustaining itself for long periods of time and create very inexpensive energy? And you've heard this discussion before. That is where this gets into the discussion of dark matter, because there's some types of dark matter. We've identified some types of it. People often say it's a theoretical debate, but there is evidence for relic neutrinos. You can just look on Wikipedia, of all places, for cosmic background radiation. And there's strong indirect evidence for small percentage of what we call dark matter, 1 or 2%, to be neutrino background radiation from the cosmos, from big birth of the universe events billions of years ago. They're still coming, they're still around, these little particles from that time period. And they have gravitational effects, and they seem to be involved in some of these cold fusion linear reactions. And that's from the work of Dr. Alexander Parkhomov in Russia and other researchers. And so that's one way that these relic neutrinos seem to act like catalysts to spur reactions on. And they're also all at the same frequency and temperature because they were created at the same time in the universe. And that's one type of particle that could be involved in these sort of continuous self-looping types of energy reactions that I think some types of organisms may take advantage of and use it in a way that just helps them survive. In the case of Bigfoot, there are a number of ways, in my view, that they could be generating these types of charge clusters, one of which could be through cavitation. People have heard them singing, making these very consistent humming sounds and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm wondering whether they use sound to generate and tap into this type of energy process that I'm talking about, some sort of natural cavitation, where they figured out how to do this, not in the laboratory, but right in their bodies like they do everything else. They can generate some sort of cavitation process and have access to types of energy that we don't consciously realize we could access. Because you talk to witnesses, they talk about this humming sound around the Bigfoot.
Yes.
So you wonder whether they have this natural technological ability from sound cavitation, which has already been demonstrated in the lab. And it's something that you don't want to turn up too much because it can create types of radiation, gamma radiation and so forth, which isn't healthy to be around. I'm not saying the Bigfoot are doing that, but at a low level, you could do it safely without the radiation. And it's a big subject, but there's an aspect of Bigfoot around gifting and their ability to morph and change materials into other things that people have talked about occasionally, even repairing things on the outside of their homes that seemed irreparable.
Or even repairing people with their health.
Yeah.
Which is that just
Exactly.
blows my mind. I don't even know how to deal with that yet.
Harriet Myers has talked about that and others.
Wow.
Healing experiences around Bigfoot. I've heard a couple of these where people who really seem to have something really terminal were healed. And they said that they heard these sounds outside their tents the whole night. So I don't have the definitive answer to this. It is one way that we can go from an animal, mammal creature like Bigfoot, human, ancient human, whatever they are, into sort of exotic physics is through sound. Another way we can get there is through hair. Hair can build up static charge. And if one thing is pretty consistent across Bigfoot descriptions, it's the amount of hair that they have. Sometimes very long hair, right? I don't think that's just for decoration. Again, it's like nature doesn't waste anything. So they're walking along wherever they are, whether it's in the forests or the deserts or the mountains. They could be building up static charge, which they store through their very fine hairs. The type of hair they have is a very fine type of hair. Perfect for creating static charges. And once you have static buildup, if you can create some charge separation and then recombine the charges in some way, you're creating charge clusters, exotic vacuum objects, and these changes in permittivity that we were talking about a few minutes ago. So those are two ways that I could think of Bigfoot doing this naturally, biologically, that doesn't even go beyond ordinary science.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And thank you. You were able to boil it down rather nicely in the way that people hear that. They're like, I want to hear some more of that. Check out Dark Matter Monsters for sure. Now, there's over the years when I've noticed certain patterns in my interviews, I've started to come up with maybe a hypothesis of some sorts in something that I've noticed. And I think your book might go into it a bit as well. But what I've started to notice is that when an individual will go into an area that is extremely active and they have an experience of some sort, a lot of times afterwards, they will start to almost unlock abilities or have things happen, everything from they might hear voices or start to have things happen around their house. And some people call that the hitchhiker effect. But does your research try to go into that at all, what people experience when they're back home and then weird things start to happen?
I'm glad you brought that up, Jeremiah. That is a really interesting aspect of all this because, again, it's not just confined to Bigfoot experiences. It's the same thing happens around people who've had UFO sightings sometimes and visited some of these paranormal hotspot areas and so forth. And yeah, it's been called the hitchhiker effect. Lukatsky talks about that in his book as a type of like a medical contagion. You know, it's almost like a virus, like an energetic virus you picked up, transported back home. I don't think it's literally a hitchhiker effect. I don't think anything has attached itself to you. What's happened is you've been exposed to another energy field with a different permittivity than what you're used to, and it's caused some of your own permittivity to start oscillating a bit. So the experience has changed you so that you're perceiving a wider range of frequencies than you did before the experience. And now that you're perceiving a wider range of frequencies, you're seeing more of what's out there that was there the whole time, but you didn't interact with it or see it before. Because this is something that it goes back to so many types of encounters, even people that have encountered orbs in the road driving their car. There's a case about this, the Day case, that Andrew Collins writes about in his book, I think, The New Circle Makers or something. It starts off as a book about crop circles. By the way, we saw some of these types of effects around crop circles, something I was involved in researching since 1997. And Collins talks about the Day family just encountering, I forgot the color of the orb, whether it was bluish or something, on the road on the outskirts of London. They have missing time. When they come back, a couple hours are missing. They drive home, and then they have these types of experiences around their homes, see shadow people, hear voices, change their lifestyles in very interesting ways, become very concerned about the ecology of the earth. They quit smoking and drinking. Really a transformative effect. And this often happens with Bigfoot experiencers too. And look, I'm not claiming to completely explain all this because it's really strange. Sometimes people drive home from locations that seem far away on the highway, yet the Bigfoot is back there at their home the same night. They see them out their window. The pets are starting to act strangely and stuff. And it's just stretching your ability of what you could believe if something was running all the way to get back to where these people are. I'm not saying that's impossible, but it does raise a lot of questions because, yes, people have this sort of experience. They see cryptids back in their home. Now, going to the extreme, like Lakatsky talks about in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, those researchers from analysts, as he calls them, from DIA, some of them, as he says, battle-hardened veterans of combat, go out to Skinwalker Ranch as part of the OSAP program when Bigelow owned it, and they experience orbs and strange creatures out there and so forth, UFOs. And they go back to their comfortable Maryland suburbs only to see cryptids. And I think Lukatsky's talking about dogman type cryptids back in Maryland. That's pretty far away from Utah. If you've ever driven it, it's far away. So what is going? This is why Lukatsky describes it like a contagion, something that spreads, this kind of medical analogy. Because these people were not talking to their families what they had been doing, because OSAP, I believe, was a special access program. I don't think it was something that they were at liberty to talk about. There was some classification involved. And yet they claimed that their wives and kids started seeing these dogmen too in the backyards. And even the friends of the kids started seeing them around. So that would suggest that your frequency has been changed by being out at Skinwalker Ranch. Your permittivity or some aspect of the physics that makes up who you are has been changed. And now you're resonating at a different frequency and you're affecting other people. So I can see why they use that analogy, but I don't think it's literally any entities attaching themselves to you. I think it's you've had a new experience and it's changed your ability to perceive and interact with what's already out there. And that becomes this cold fusion analogy we were using a few moments ago.
Right.
Like with excess heat creating a self-sustaining reaction. It's like that, but with information. It's created a self-sustaining reaction that you're participating in too. That's my interpretation of it, Jeremiah.
It's a really cool interpretation. It really is. Do you think that, and this is just me thinking out loud, there could be no answer for this, but do you think that change that happens to witnesses could be permanent for some, and for some others it just goes away eventually and then things are back to normal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think in many cases it just goes back to normal. I know people like this. I'll give you an example of this, okay? And I have permission to talk about this story. I had a friend from Arizona come visit me in Boulder while I was working on Dark Matter Monsters. I was literally putting the book together. We hadn't seen each other in 10 years. We used to do remote viewing together. She just thought it'd be fun to come and visit and talk about the remote viewing, spend a little time together, hang out and talk about what we had learned from RV and go over our sessions and things from the past. So I told her about writing the book. She wasn't a believer in Bigfoot. She told me later that she thought people like you and me were like weirdos who believed in this stuff, that sort of idea, that we were just making this up. And yet she didn't tell me that at the time, but she told me that later. I didn't hear from her for quite a while after she left. And then I get a communication that she had Bigfoot encounters around her family's summer cabin in northeastern Arizona, in that area, the Mangian Rim area. And it started to intensify. She started seeing the tree structures, which she thought were just built by Boy Scouts in the past. She took photos of them. They were like the typical teepee structures with a lot of sticks. And she heard the whooping sounds, which she had always attributed just to some forest sounds from animals. And even the smell, the kind of a wet dog smell out the window. And this is in the forest. It just in a town at the edge of the forest. And then it intensified, and she went back one time. And the way she described it was she was doing a meditation, and all of a sudden the meditation felt too good. It felt too strong. Like something was helping her with the meditation. She opened her eyes and saw a huge Sasquatch staring right at her through the picture window in a crouched position. She said it was taller than she was, crouched, squatting. It was 5 or 6 feet high. And when it stood up, when they made eye contact, she said it was 12 feet or more. And it was so terrifying for her that she felt a whole range of emotions and feelings. And it was this real strong eye contact that people describe, the witnesses you have on the show and you're familiar with. It's like you're not looking at an ape. You're looking at a person with a kind of sense of mental cognition. Like they know what you are. You know what they are. It's like looking at a person with a lot of hair. And it was such a mixture of terror and wonder that she just fled into the car and didn't even take her laptop, turn out the lights, or lock the door, like in a movie. She just didn't know what to do. So she went from being a total non-believer. And then she talks with me, this author who's writing a book, then goes home and just goes to the family's vacation place and starts seeing the tree structures and hearing sounds, goes back and then has this very close contact, maybe 100 feet away, which is so terrifying for her. She never goes back to the cabin and they sell it. So I have always wondered, so this is my world, is just talking about it to people. Did it lead to the encounter, or did it get her to be curious and now she's a little more open-minded? She did play around with their tree structures, and I'm wondering whether that got them to come closer in. But that is what we're talking about here, how extreme this can be. So is that a type of contagion effect? We're just talking about it led to the, I don't know. We don't know the answer to these questions. Another quick anecdote. I had a friend who read the book, one of the first copies, after they came off the printing press, and she told me she had never had very much interest in Bigfoot, but all of a sudden she started having very realistic dreams about them after reading the book. So you could say she was just imagining, thinking about it. Or did it change her in some way to come in contact with the subject and really read a book about it? And all of a sudden her dreams change where they seem very lucid, like almost real.
No, I believe that 100%.
So those are just, those are just two examples right there, where just talking about it, thinking about it leads to either some very close encounters or dream encounters. Jeremiah, it's a good question. We don't totally know the answer. For some people, it just goes back to normal. Now, there are those people that never want to think about it again because it was too scary. I know those types of witnesses. They just don't want to think about it. It scared them. They weren't believers. They encountered these creatures just on a nature walk, and it just terrified them. So going back to your question, the weird things that happen around, what about the mental telepathy? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a commonality with alleged extraterrestrials, whatever, in these craft, UAP, UFOs, and Sasquatch. You've heard this time and again. We even heard it from Les Stroud. Remember his Survivor Man Bigfoot series on YouTube?
Oh,
he
yeah.
just did Survivor Man. And then, yeah, so he was one of the early people that got me really interested in the topic, just as he was just an outdoors person, had no interest in the subject, but hears something during the filming, monkey chat or something, gets curious and starts going to these hotspot places. And finally, in the bonus episode, he goes out to Portland, Oregon, and he's out there. They see orbs, and he gets this telepathic contact, which he found disturbing. It was so disturbing, he said he went to a psychiatric professional to make sure he wasn't cracking up. And you've heard this before. People wonder, what the heck? That mind talk. So that is the type of thing, going back to the earlier part of our discussion here about parallel realities, does it lead to some lead through of, is it a mechanical type thing where they can literally project some frequency into your brain? That's a possibility, like the infrasound idea and so forth. Or is it like they occupy another reality the way Ron Moorhead describes in his encounters at the Sierra camp, right? And the Flash of Beauty people are coming out, the crew, they're producing a movie about the Sierra Sounds. They had a Kickstarter. It was funded. They've been working on this for a couple of years. They were out there in the Sierra Nevadas filming. And there is going to be the first documentary ever about the Sierra camp, going back to the Johnson brothers, even before Ron Moorhead was up there, going back to the 50s. And I believe it was the 50s because I've seen a little preview of it.
Oh, nice.
And people are familiar with Ron Moorhead, the Sierra Sounds, right? It's classic for those of us interested in this subject. But if you talk to Ron, he wasn't looking at physical creatures. He actually never saw them except, I believe, one time at a distance. They were invisible. So this is someone who's experienced them, I believe, most of his 9 trips up to the Sierra camp on horseback. And yet he says you couldn't see them. You'd hear the sounds. We've all heard the Sierra camp recordings, right? It's on YouTube. It's on the internet. Right outside the hunting structure. Oh, when I've talked to Ron, he said they should have cast shadows. We could have seen the shadows in the cracks between the logs that were used to make that hunting structure. And there were no shadows. You'd pop your head out, you didn't see anything. Plus the other weird sound phenomena they had inside the hunting structure, sounds like gongs and things like that over the structure, plus all the weird light phenomena in and around the hunting structure. Like one time you said there was something like a Star Wars like lightsaber moving through the forest. Yeah. So these all kind of go together. This is what the witnesses tell us, the best witnesses, the Ron Moorheads, who deliberately brought up skeptics to try to disprove what they were seeing up there. And the skeptics said, no, it's real. We're seeing the same thing. We're hearing the same thing. So these are people with multiple encounters, and now we're going to have a film about it, documenting it. Apart from Ron's great books about it, Quantum, Bigfoot, and his first book about the Sierra Sounds themselves. And this is what we have in the record of evidence, is these types of encounters. So there are just a lot of aspects to it. But I'm just thinking, I don't know if Ron we should ask Ron sometime, did he experience a hitchhiker effect?
That's a great question. That's a really
I
good
don't
question.
know. I
Yeah.
never heard him talk about
I don't
that.
think
I
I have
never
either.
heard him talk about it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think he ever mentioned it. So this doesn't have to be inherently spooky. It's not like it has to follow you home, but sometimes it does. It seems to, quote unquote, follow you home. But again, it goes back to more of these electromagnetic analogies, the non-ordinary type of electromagnetism. Let me just use this type of analogy, Jeremiah. You've heard about cases of UFOs magnetizing non-magnetic materials,
Sure.
wood. That's sort of what it's like. Okay. You've been around something that's at another frequency, whether it's through charge clusters from building up static charge on their fur or sound cavitation or however they're doing this. Could be multiple methods. It's just like the UFOs are capable of creating magnetization of non-magnetic materials. You're getting this sort of electromagnetization of what you generally thought was non-electromagnetic structures around your home, around your yard, just the ordinary biological plants and fauna of nature. That I'm not saying it's like a direct type of magnetization. But to me, don't you think it seems it's just like an analogy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
It's what I think it is. I think it's closer to that. You also get that, by the way, around cold fusion Lenner experiments, that magnetization of plastic and stuff, just materials in the lab. So again, the fact that you see this across different subjects, again, it's just a big clue that it's some fundamental underlying alternate type of electromagnetism, like alternate interpretation of Maxwell's equations that still preserve a symmetry, but it's a different type of symmetry, like a fractal symmetry, that it doesn't violate the laws of electromagnetism, but it just leads us into a different direction that we normally don't think about a lot because we live in a very corporatized type of society which has commodified electromagnetism, right? It's turned it into something that's packaged and sold by the watt.
Exactly.
And so those, the powers that be and the ones that create the networks and the early electrification companies also created those networks that became the three basic TV networks. They just institutionally had an agenda to keep people focused on the price of consumption and ordinary stuff that keeps their businesses going. And this would be why we haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about these alternative types of electromagnetism.
Bingo.
But I think when you look at it this way, yeah, I think that's what it is. And I'm not blaming anyone here. I'm not even creating a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying the institutions that we've had for a couple hundred years had a profit motive, which kept them focused on getting our attention on screens and speakers that basically sold their sorts of products and their types of entertainment and so forth. Because the early TV networks also created their own shows. So you can see the link back between the type of media you and I have been exposed to since we were kids, all the way back to the original companies, Westinghouse, JP Morgan, people that funded the electrification of the United States. And that's
100%.
why get it? So that's why this stuff seems weird. It only seems weird is because we haven't been exposed to the alternative interpretations, just because the people that were delivering the media to us didn't feel it was in their institutional interest to go in this direction because it didn't increase the sales of their products, whether it be sports or entertainment, whatever. And that's why it seems so superficial when you look at our media until the advent of the internet just recently, a couple decades ago. I think YouTube started when, I forget, when was that, 2006 or so? 7. We haven't had this democratization of media where we can talk like this and share information, right, on an equal playing field with major media. I think the good news is in all of this is that we have a lot of access to a lot of podcasts and information like yours, like others, where we can hear what people have been experiencing and give them the respect they deserve, the time of day to listen. What did you see? What did you hear? And not just tell them you saw a bear, or you saw a pack of dogs, blah, blah, blah. They saw something really weird, and we should just get over it and accept it. I'm not saying I can completely explain all of this. I don't want to give people the impression we're explaining this away. I'm not a reductionist. I'm just saying there's an angle on it that can give us some information about what we're dealing with. We really don't understand who these life forms are, what their interest with us is, where they live actually most of the time. How do they do what they do? I think we've, like you were saying at the very beginning, like we can cover the surface of it a little bit.
Exactly.
But there's such a long way to go. But the first step, Jeremiah, is just to admit it's real. It exists. You could step out your door in most places now and encounter something we don't even know what you encountered.
I think that's a great way to summarize it. But Simeon, you're right. It's like this is just scratching the surface for so many listeners. And I hope that they'll go out, check out your book and really dive into it. But I feel like this is a conversation we could go on for hours. But at this point, I've been wanting to have you on for years, and I'm so glad you're able to come on. But do you mind spending a few minutes about how people can keep up to date with what you're doing and things that they want to check out that you've put out there?
Oh, sure. I have a whole number of websites. Some are just devoted to remote viewing training. You can do some of it at home on your own. Occasionally, I have live classes that I do on Zoom. If people want to try RV for themselves, just one little tiny aspect of what we've been talking about today, I have this rvminiclass.com site where you can see what it feels like to actually get non-local information. It's just one component of everything we've been talking about today, but it's just a part that people can experience on their own, in their own home or wherever they are. So my blog is thecrystalmind.com. I started that a good long time ago. We're coming up on 16, 17 years of keeping that blog going about all these different sort of topics. I have a YouTube channel where people can just put my name in and you can find my YouTube channel, and where I just discuss these topics. And I have a Patreon page, Dark Matter Mysteries, where I'll post special things for viewers and members and stuff. So those are a couple different ways that you can stay in contact. We can communicate. And the goal here is just to increase the amount of information we have that we're sharing with each other. And I think together we're all going to figure this out. Just the weight of the evidence, the fact that we can all share it so freely is really encouraging.
100%. Dr. Simeon Hein, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll have to definitely keep in touch. Hopefully our paths will cross again sometime in the future. But thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Talk soon.
Before we wrap this episode, I want to say something directly to a very specific group of listeners. If you're in the military, any branch or forces, and if you've seen something that no one can explain, or if you're a national park ranger or forestry worker who's been told to stay quiet, or if you're a pilot who's seen something strange down on the ground, or if you're with the FBI, a federal agency, or working intelligence, and you stumbled upon something you're not allowed to talk about, and if you're a firefighter, paramedic, or search and rescue responder who's heard screams or found tracks that didn't make sense, if you're in the logging industry, on a remote oil field, or a trucker with government contracts, and you've had something happen that you've never told a soul, and if you're a biologist, a wildlife specialist, or a field researcher under contract who has found evidence you're not allowed to report, if you're a pastor, a missionary, or someone on a spiritual retreat, and you saw something that shook your faith, or if you work in the shadows, CIA, NSA, or anything with clearance, and you've seen what the public hasn't, then I want to talk to you. Even if it's anonymous, you can reach me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. The world needs to hear what you've been forced to carry alone, and you're not alone. You've got the story. We've got the mic. See you in the woods. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Every encounter we share reminds us that the world is bigger and stranger than we think, and that the truth is often hiding just beyond the tree line. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode, and share this with a friend who's into mysteries, monsters, or the unexplained. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, please follow the show there and leave us a 5-star positive review, because all that helps more people discover the show. And remember, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot sighting, please, I'd love to hear from you. So email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com and let's start the conversation. If you haven't gotten a chance yet, check out our membership community over at www.bigfootsocietypodcast.com. And that's where you can hear tomorrow's episode today, early and ad-free, and members-only episodes every week. Also, it's a place to connect with other people that are into the Bigfoot subject as much as you are. Thanks again for following along with the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there. And see you in the woods.